You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Sean Lay. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme, and I hope you enjoy it. Donald Trump calls the impeachment inquiry a witch hunt. In recent days, the US president has been accused of trying to intimidate a witness. Now a US ambassador central to the allegations, a Trump supporter who donated $1 million for his inauguration celebrations, has told Congress the president did make aid for Ukraine contingent on the Ukrainians launching an inquiry into the son of Joe Biden. Mr. Biden could be Trump's Democrat challenger in next year's presidential election. Media mogul Christopher Ruddy of Newsmax has known Donald Trump well for 20 years. He's accused Democrats of playing politics with impeachment. After this week, how much trouble is Donald Trump in? Christopher Ruddy, welcome to Hard Talk. You didn't want this impeachment inquiry. You said it was just political game playing by the Democrats. As the inquiry has developed, do you now accept that it's a necessary process for American politics to be going through?
Well, I think we should respect the process, but we should also call it for what it is, which is a bit of a charade. Usually, in a case like this, you would first gather evidence and decide whether an impeachment process is really proper. Nancy Pelosi pulled the trigger on impeachment without looking at the whistleblower complaint, without interviewing any of the witnesses, without ever seeing the president's transcript with President Zelensky. Now, some of that information has come out since then, but I think it's been preordained that it's going to be an impeachment. And that's, I think, bad for the country. And the public approval polls over here in America show that they have not gotten a majority support yet for this impeachment.
You say that, in effect, the Democrats have prejudged the evidence. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, said this week that even if an impeachment trial is held in the Senate, it would be inconceivable that senators who are in fact the jury would dismiss the president from office. Isn't that, in a sense, too, prejudging the outcome?
Well, so far, the known evidence suggests that there was no impeachable crime. The Constitution is very clear. A president can be impeached and removed for high crimes and misdemeanors. Nobody has yet identified a crime that the president committed or an actual law that he broke. I am one, and I've said this publicly, I don't think everything the president did was appropriate. Presidents make big mistakes. Ronald Reagan, I'm a big admirer of President Reagan. Reagan did the whole Iran-Contra thing. He violated the arms embargo. He sold arms to the Iranians. He took money from that deal and gave it to the Contras in contravention of U.S. law. So all of that was potentially impeachable. He wasn't impeached. I think it was far more serious than what's been alleged against President Trump. But
in a sense, two wrongs don't make a right. Just because Reagan, in your view, should probably have gone through some kind of inquiry and possible impeachment. And impeachment, we should be clear for viewers elsewhere in the world, is the process. It's not necessarily the outcome. So a president can be impeached, the process can begin, but in the end, they're not forced from office. And that happened with Bill Clinton, for example. Just to pick up, though, on your point about whether a high crime or misdemeanor has been committed, the Constitution is silent on the definition of that, although it did say it didn't think maladministration would be enough, the founders suggested when they were drawing up the documents of the Constitution. But the Congress has attempted to define this. It attempted to define it at the time of Richard Nixon's possible impeachment, and it concluded that improperly exceeding or abusing the powers of office, behaviour incompatible with the function and purpose of the office, and, quotes, misusing the office for an improper purpose or for personal gain would constitute a high crime.
Well, that would be your understanding of the president's intent. Was he actually trying to do it for personal gain? He's the chief law enforcement officer of the nation. He wanted an investigation of two things. One was the 2016 election and the Ukrainian role in the hacking and other matters relating to that. And second, of the Biden's involvement in firing a prosecutor that was trying to uncover corruption.
Alleged involvement.
And as you recall, Joe Biden, when he was vice president, and Joe Biden, well, it's very clear because Biden publicly demanded the removal of the prosecutor and was threatening to withhold U.S. aid over it. The same thing what they're accusing the president of doing. If you look at the transcript, and I encourage your folks that all over the world you can look it up, read that transcript. The president always says, go to the transcript. I don't believe the transcript's perfect, but I do think it's somewhat exculpatory. President Trump says, I'd like you to really investigate what happened in the 2016 election. I think that's perfectly within bounds. And actually, he was trying to investigate what happened to the Democratic servers and how
Sure,
it
but that's the past election, isn't it? We're talking about trying to potentially influence the outcome of a forthcoming election in the United States.
So at the very end, Sean, at the very end of that 40-minute conversation, Zelensky raises the issue of investigations again. And the president says, wouldn't it be good if you guys looked at Joe Biden putting pressure on the government to fire the prosecutor who was trying to look into corruption? That's all he said. He didn't say, I want them criminally investigated. And it was very clear there was in that transcript, no quid pro quo. So I think that again, is not a perfect situation. There were problems here. This should have been dealt with normal congressional oversight. I don't see an impeachable crime, and nobody has identified what the crime is, and that's why the public is starting to, their eyes are glazing over at these congressional hearings.
You say it's, we'll see what the public think once they've heard all the evidence actually in public, as opposed to the stuff that's been selectively leaked from behind closed doors from previous stages of this process. But just on your point about there was no explicit quid pro quo. I mean, that's even being challenged in the various stages of the investigation of the witnesses this week. But isn't this a better analogy in a sense, rather than suggesting there was a bribe involved, rather suggesting it's a bit like a protection racket, something that anyone who's ever operated in New York politics or business would understand what goes on around the edges of these things. No one explicitly says, give me the money or your business will be torched, but the subject knows that if they refuse, something bad will happen to them. In this case, security aid. Absolutely critical to Ukraine's future. A country that is threatened with dismemberment by Russia has already experienced some of that over Crimea. Your president was apparently saying or implying, according to these witnesses, if you don't do this investigation, not only don't you get to meet me in the Oval Office, but you don't get that money. And that money could be crucial to the country's future.
So much you've said there. Some of it's factually true, some of it isn't, Sean. The president never said, there's no evidence yet that the president said, I want a quid pro quo. In fact, Ambassador Sondland has testified, he asked the president, is this a quid pro quo? And the president did not say yes. Now, I think it's very clear that Rudy Giuliani, people under the president, were squeezing the Ukrainians. Were they doing it on the orders of the president or not? I'm not sure. So that's one issue that hasn't been resolved. The president says he did not squeeze them. To do that, he did give the aid. In fact, on 2 or 3 occasions now, he gave lethal aid to the Ukrainians that President Obama would not give them. So I think he's shown a historical track record of helping the Ukraine. Alan Dershowitz, one of the most famous liberal Democrats, he supported Hillary Clinton, Harvard law professor. He has said what the president did was a political sin, not a political crime. We're criminalizing If Senator Smith says to Senator Jones in the Senate,
yes,
you give me the bridge money, I'll give you the highway money for my state, that's a quid pro quo. It's not a bribe. It's not a crime. At least I don't think it would. You'd have to put half of Congress in the jail if that's a crime.
In the end, the judgment will be made, it now looks like, by the senators when it comes to it. I wonder what you make of the remarks from a former US senator who only left office in January, who says that if it were a public vote, probably Donald Trump is home and dry. If it was a private vote, though, this is Jeff Flake, who was saying, I've heard Democrats say, well, we'd be lucky to see 30 Republicans wouldn't flip. He says he thinks actually 35 Republicans, if the evidence were there, could vote against the president. I mean, is he in real danger, do you think?
I think that's very speculative. How do you know what people would do in a private vote? I don't know. I do think that the president right now is very highly divided Senate. I think some of the approaches the White House is taking, where they're criticizing some of the witnesses, is not a smart thing, because it'll scare independent voters who will influence these senators that might be on the fence about this issue.
So his tweets
right
when
now,
Yovanovitch was giving evidence, the former ambassador to Ukraine, you don't think that was helpful when he sort of said this woman has been a disaster wherever she's gone, actually, while she was giving evidence this week?
Well, look, we have a president that's not a politician. It's the first time in our history, really, that this has happened. And he's a guy that likes to speak his mind, whether it hurts him or helps him. And I think sometimes it hurts him when he does that, but he likes to do it. People forget, he tweeted about the Bidens before that phone call with Zelensky. He actually talked to the press and said some of this needs to be investigated. It wasn't he was doing it surreptitiously. So In his mind, I've known the man for many years. I've never known him to want to break the law. I can't believe for a second he'd get on a phone call with 10 people listening, as was the case with Zelensky, and try to imply that somehow he was breaking the law or suggesting that laws should be broken. Or
maybe he just didn't understand what the legal limitations of his office are.
Well, I believe, there's so many laws and regulations. I think he has a very expansive view of the presidency. He comes from the business world where you have a sort of impulse to do something, you just do it. And if no one thinks it's a crime, he probably thinks, well, this happens all the time in politics and international affairs. You ask foreign leaders. I haven't spoken to him specifically about if there was a quid pro quo or not. I have spoken to him, and he indicated he did not think he did anything wrong. And I believe he didn't commit a crime, but I also think he didn't have criminal intent here. And I think that's coming through pretty clear in these hearings as well. Think about this. There were all these people involved, all these diplomats, Ambassador Taylor, Sondland, Volker. We know there were all these NSC aides on. No one filed an official complaint against the president. Yeah, nobody filed an official complaint, Sean, against the president. The whistleblower was not involved at all. He got this secondhand. He got very big, important facts wrong. It's very unusual. You have a whistleblower who gets it from secondhand knowledge, so it's sort of like hearsay. We know that Colonel Vindman reported it to the lawyers. I think that's fine. If he felt the president didn't do something proper, he never said he committed a crime. If he didn't think the president did something proper, go speak to the lawyers and say, I think you should review this. The president did this, that, or the other thing. I think that was fine. He didn't go to the Washington Post. He didn't go to Congress. He didn't file an official complaint. Now all of this comes out, and the Congress is saying it's impeachment. They're blowing it up. The public's not buying it.
Let me ask you how you think the president is handling this. I mean, as you say, you talked to him. You've obviously been talking to him as this process was initially proposed and as it's been ongoing. I noticed an interview you gave last year to the Financial Times. You said sometimes during the campaign, the kid from the mean streets of Queens came out in the campaign. He thought, if I'm going to survive, I've got to fight. In other words, sometimes he hits back stronger when he's criticised or attacked. Do you think that's what we're seeing a bit of, that character aspect of Donald Trump?
Well, I'm glad you dug that quote up. I would say not sometimes. I would say he always hits back and maybe punches down sometimes. He actually, even though he grew up quite wealthy, he was in an enclave surrounded by very difficult neighborhoods in Queens and New York City. Some areas were very tough. And he's a guy that likes to fight back. If you punch him, he wants to punch you back harder. It's not the typical way in politics that things are done. It's not my approach, but it's his approach, and it's worked for him. The public, I think, ultimately will decide all of this in the upcoming election. We only are 12 months away. I'm not sure why the Democrats are doing this. They should have just put some of this out in congressional oversight. I think in my conversation with the president that it was just a political act.
There is a consequence, perhaps, to some of the attacks. And let me put to you what Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador to Ukraine, said in her testimony to Congress. This is the testimony she gave on camera. She said, the attacks are leading to a crisis in the State Department as the policy process is visibly unravelling, leadership vacancies go unfilled, and senior and mid-level officers ponder an uncertain future and head for the doors.
Yeah, well, there's a backstory to that too, is, the Democrats have been holding up a lot of Trump nominees, so they were not able to really put into the government.
Well, I'm not sure the figures back you up on that. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Forgive me for interrupting you, Christopher, but just to be specific about this, since we have relatively recent figures from this, the Washington Post on the 18th of November said there are, you're right, 107 formally nominated who've not yet been actually gone through the process. Those, you could argue, are being held up. 491 confirmed, but there are 139 posts out of these 741 jobs where there isn't even a nominee, never mind somebody actually in post. And this is come the end of January, it'll be 3/4 of the way through the presidency. Yeah. And the implication is that some of those jobs can't be filled because people don't want them.
But Sean, what came first, the chicken and the egg? I mean, this has been the Democratic strategy in the Senate: block the nominees, create such a backlog. Why would anyone want to go into that list? I've known people that are very highly qualified and they won't even think about it because they know that it takes so long. So that's why they're not even nominating people. I think it's a shame, the president came in here from almost day one, they were talking about impeachment. I'm not saying he's a perfect guy. I think he's a good guy. And I think he's done a lot of reform agenda in the United States that doesn't get out in the international audience. Criminal justice reform, nobody could do for 20 years. He did it. Veterans reform, he did it. The tax code, needed corporate tax code, 30 years never reformed. He did it. He has a long list of these things, and he gets no credit for it, other than the economy is booming over in the United States, and it's one of the real success stories in the whole world.
As you know, a lot of those things you've mentioned, though, are things he has to do in cooperation with Congress. That is the nature of the US political system, the checks and balances system. So he can't just, by executive fiat, do policy. He has to negotiate with Congress, and he's had some successes. You mentioned the tax code is one very explicit example of where he got his way. He's still arguing with Congress over things like the wall and all the rest of it. But is he worried about the reputation of his administration for a lack of candour? Does that bother him at all?
No.
Right.
He's not a guy that worries about what people are going to think about him or the future. He does what, at the moment, he thinks is the right thing to do.
Because according to the Washington Post fact checker, as of 9th of October this year, in his 993 days in office, he's made 13,435 false or misleading claims. It's quite a record.
Well, I don't know. Some of them, the Washington Post makes some claims that are false and misleading too. I haven't gone through and seen what they're... this president is the first unscripted president we've had in recent memory. Most presidents speak almost entirely from a script whenever they're public. He is the complete opposite way. And so much things are being said. He's a salesman. I do think it would be better if he got closer and double-checked facts before he went public with them. And it does create some issues of confusion. I don't think he purposefully lies. But I do think he once said in one of his books he likes to exaggerate to make a point. And if you understand that his showbiz background, I think it becomes a little more contextual.
I mean, as a journalist yourself, you're candid enough to admit that in retrospect, some of the things you wrote 20 years ago was a bit over the top, some of your commentary. But you do value facts, and you've said you do worry about the environment in which we now live, in which kind of, because of social media and because of the way information can spread fast, that fake news is a genuine problem for the media. Is that one that journalists like you in the States are taking seriously enough?
Let's go back. 2 years, 3 years, the government spent $50 million, major congressional investigation, saying that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. You folks internationally didn't see this, but every night it was headline news on all the major networks here in the U.S. Nothing came of it. The Mueller report came out, and they said they found no evidence of Russian collusion. The president waived executive privilege. He didn't obstruct justice. He opened it up. 500 witnesses. Everybody was allowed to testify. They still tried to say he was not being cooperative after doing that, but they found no evidence of it. So when you say the president exaggerates, lies, and spins, I would say this is a problem endemic now to the whole media political landscape. Why at media sites like Newsmax, if you go there, we try to have both sides and not try to force... on Newsmax.com, we try to not force people to take political positions, but give them information that they can make informed decisions.
Let me ask you about something that there's been a lot of interest in America in recent days, and that's why the president was admitted to Walter Reed Hospital. The White House says it was a routine matter. The trouble is the White House's credibility on these things is it being questioned.
Well, the White House has said some things that are not always congruent with the facts, but I do think that the president, he was only there for a brief visit. He is in his 70s. I'm sure he has medical exams. I had an annual physical, and I've had to do 2 or 3 follow-ups, and I have no serious
Don't
health
they come to you, though,
whatsoever,
if it's an unscheduled
but it's sort
thing?
Of normal.
Don't they come to you if it's a routine blood test or
No,
something like that?
usually-
If you're president.
No, because sometimes you have to do examinations that involve machinery, and especially for the heart or for the brain or for other parts of your anatomy. So I'm not that surprised. I've seen the president. This man is he's almost superhuman with his energy level, and he starts at 6 in the morning and he goes to midnight every day, and he's been doing this for many years.
When did
and
you
he thrives on it. And he does this time and time and time again. And I'm sure the holidays coming up, he'll be out golfing and being very engaged. He's doing a couple of rallies. I think we're going to see no evidence of this. Again, it's a little bit of a media conspiracy theory that he's sick. So, this type of thing, they say he says things that are not accurate. I think the media is highly speculative here.
The road to 2020 is an important one for the president. We are only a couple of months now from the beginning of the process. He at least can be confident that he is his party's nominee, likely to be his party's nominee, unless, of course, the impeachment process should prevent that. So he's looking forward to November 2020. Is there a road to victory?
There's a very clear road to victory. I think that's one of the reasons why Pelosi did this impeachment. The Democrats really don't have anything to stop the president. His poll numbers are amazingly strong. I just looked up, even in this impeachment, almost every poll, an Economist magazine poll out yesterday had him at 44% approval. That's for registered voters. Likely voters is usually 3 to 5 points higher. So he's about 50%. For a guy that's gone through what he's gone through with the media, this is an amazing result. And the Democrats have a very weak field, and they're putting forward people that are usually associated with the very far left with very radical proposals, like abolishing private health insurance in America. I don't think they're going to go very far. I think the president is very situated in a very strong position to win re-election.
He did just go out canvassing for two gubernatorial candidates in the South, in two states that are strongly Republican states, Kentucky and Louisiana, and they both lost.
Yeah, well, each of them have their own stories, right? Governor Bevin was not very popular, and he came very close to winning, I think with the president's help, but he was not, and he had his own issues. Every other Republican in the state won big there. And then the governor of Louisiana was a very popular conservative Democrat. Took positions very much at variance, like was strongly against abortion, for instance, a big issue in the South. And he won, and it was closer than people thought it would have been, because the president was involved. So I think it's a little overstated to say that somehow that was an indication of public viewing about the president.
I suppose the question would be, if he stops being a vote winner, whether that might be the issue which would start some of those senators starting to doubt whether he was worth supporting. If they don't think he's going to be a vote winner for them next November, might they then look to their own interests electorally and start to distance themselves from this Republican president?
Well, that's politics, isn't it? I mean, Nixon was very strong in the beginning of the impeachment. As the economy faltered, his approval numbers went down. Support for him keeping in office evaporated. Bill Clinton, you had the opposite effect. He remained very popular. He conducted the nation's business, and he sailed through the impeachment. In fact, some people say he came out stronger after the impeachment effort that failed against him.
Chris Ruddy, founder and chief executive of Newsmax Media, thanks very much for being with us on Hard Talk.
Hi, I'm Kalki Kekla, and I'm back for another season of My Indian Life. My Indian Life is the BBC World Service podcast that brings you real-life stories from young people in India.
I want to be the first human on Mars, so let me make that happen and set that as a goal for myself.
They're sometimes raw.
This wasn't just me being a victim, it was a lot of people who were suffering.
They're sometimes uplifting.
At no point do you get upset?
No.
Never.
I don't get upset.
And they are always a fascinating listen.
I feel kind of proud that I managed to convince people to take me seriously.
That's Kalki Presents My Indian Life.
What is the point of just complaining? If you want to do something, do something.
There's a teaser for the second season available now. Just search for My Indian Life wherever you get your podcasts.